Hello, welcome back to the Women in Movement podcast. Here in Brooklyn with Leah Raye, who is an instructor, performer, massage therapist, and has many other talents and things under her belt. Leah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me, T. Yes, I'm a pole dancer, a pole instructor, an erotic dancer. I came to pole via a path from being a competitive martial artist as a kid and then becoming a competitive powerlifter in my early 20s, and then found pole dancing in my late 20s, which really just pulled the rug out from underneath my feet and opened the portal to the person who I am now.
Wonderful. And your followers already have some early on questions for you. So
okay.
if you would like to answer, what is like how long does it take you to come up with one of your routines?
Okay. A long time. I'm really so when I come up with a routine, ideally I don't know. Sometimes they come together really quickly and I love when that happens. But my first performance took me 2 full months
Wow.
to choreograph. And granted, I put a lot of pressure on myself to come up with that piece. This is to Ozzy Osbourne's Hellraiser, which is the one that you put on your stories when you asked for people had questions for me. But yeah, that it took me so long to finally decide to even perform. I just really wanted to make a good first impression, and I did that on Incredible. And yeah, I usually know what song I want to dance to. And then I kind of start to choreograph it in my head, but I move a lot faster and more seamlessly in my head than I do in reality.
I think that's the case for a lot of people.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah. So I'll kind of start to try out the things that I have in my head. And I can definitely get married to, ideas, even if they're not executing the way that I want them to. And I can just get really stubborn and be like, no, this is going to be in my piece and I'm just going to do it, which is maybe not that smart. And I think that now that I've gotten more performances underneath my belt, I'm less like that. But yeah, I'll definitely be hacking things up, putting things together. There's a lot of frustration in the middle of it. And, the people close to me, for them, have to listen to me just like, just word vomit about what a terrible time I'm having. And I'm like, half the time I'm not even getting paid for it. It's just for the love of performing, or not getting paid a lot. But yeah, I would say nowadays I want a solid month. I think that feels good to me now. And I try to get it done in a week. I try to get the skeleton of it done in a week. And then the rest of the time I spend rehearsing it. Maybe a new idea will come to me and I start to replace stuff. But that is the general time frame now. Yeah, I realize that it's not sustainable to be like, hovering over 3 minutes of music for 2 months.
That's true. And I'll ask some of the other questions throughout, but I appreciate that your followers were very interested in hearing about you.
That's pleasantly surprising to hear. So
let's go into your background. You said you were in self-defense, martial arts. What styles were you in as a kid, and then what styles did you become like an instructor for?
Yeah, sure. So basically when I was a kid, like 4th grade, 5th grade, I did Kenpo, which is one of the 2 more common forms of martial arts that you would do as a kid, the other one probably being Taekwondo, right? So I competed in Kenpo for a couple of years, aged out of it, just kind of how it was right about when I was a brown belt. As far as when I started teaching self-defense, that was a little different. I graduated high school and I was really entrenched in feminist politics and, thinking a lot about self-defense as a young girl does, living in New York. And I wanted to get into teaching self-defense, and wouldn't you know it, I Googled Women's Self-Defense Brooklyn and found this nonprofit that had been around since 1974.
Wow.
Called the Center for Anti-Violence Education. And I cold emailed them and I was like, hey, I want to work with you guys. How can I want to do this? And they didn't respond to me. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But then they had a childcare program And I was like, okay, maybe my in is that I signed up to be a childcare worker. So I did. Whenever they had mothers taking classes, you would be in another room watching their kids. So that's how I started there. And then I started taking their teen program, and I was just kind of like, so, I want to learn to teach actually. Like I have a martial arts background. And so we kind of started on that path. So it's not the self-defense that I taught, while yes, it did borrow things from Goju Ryo Karate, it really wasn't super entrenched in like the discipline of martial arts so much, because reality is that, that's not usually what we're using, right? Like it really was about de-escalation, evasion, how do you get out of a situation as safe as possible. So while yes, we taught physical self-defense strategies, as far as striking and blocking and whatnot, it really had a big emphasis on verbal self-defense, about thinking about things that you carry on your person every day and how you can use those things, as opposed to, telltale weapons that, could be easily identified. You could be, arrested for, they could be taken from you by your attacker, etc. So kind of thinking about how to MacGyver your environment and the things that you keep with you, which I think was really, beneficial for people to learn too, because I think people maybe came into it thinking like, I gotta like, train and do all that stuff. And it's like, no, you just have to think about your environment differently. And also maybe become comfortable using your voice, which is, I think, a really a big obstacle for a lot of people who came to my class too, because a lot of them were survivors, and things like that. So it was catered specifically to women and LGBTQ plus people. So yeah.
Wow, that's very interesting and a wonderful. It sounds like a wonderful organization to be a part of. I think too, it's like I like the point that you bring up the environment, because it's like there's so many things in your environment that you could use in any situation, whether it's an alley, whether it's
totally
jumping over something, whether like whatever it is, because it is a huge piece of survival.
Absolutely.
And the more adaptable you are in different environments, like the better. And I do think that martial arts is great in so many ways, but it does miss this element of the live situation, and like those live situations you get from playing tag at the playground, right? Or just like playing like a game with a partner, like a roughhousing game or something. But it's the forms and stuff can become, when the forms become more of the priority over the actual like circumstances and acting in the circumstances. Like a lot of people also don't know how to act or don't practice acting under emergency circumstances. Absolutely. So they freeze, or they just look around for others to step forward.
Totally. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, I had a really scary encounter with somebody who I believe was schizophrenic and was probably experiencing psychosis, who approached me while I was walking my dog, screaming at me, like towering over me and like blocking me, chasing me, not letting me leave the vicinity. And I was like behind a construction barricade, so I couldn't just turn away. And I felt really trapped, and I was kind of like, okay, right now I need to keep myself and my dog safe, like not get punched in the face. So like I can't even like block my head, because this person is an inch away from my head. So if I block my head, I probably am going to punch him, and he's going to react that way. I'm going to have to think about making sure like my dog doesn't get kicked, that cigarette that he's holding is not getting put out on me,
right?
Things like that. And I'm just like, okay, there's one business like a couple feet away from me. I need to make it inside there. And then once I do that, I'm going to close the door, lock it, and that's just going to be how I get away. And I think a lot of people would see that as a failure, like you didn't, I'm like, no. You know? And I had another friend, after, because I talked about that on my Instagram stories, and another friend came up to me to, say that something similar. She was just like, I just felt so weak and powerless. I was like, no, you got away. That is the objective.
You survived.
It's not about kicking anyone's ass. I think people were like, no, I'm going to show them I'm unfuckwithable. I'm like, no, that's not the objective. The objective is to get away as unscathed as possible. And that doesn't even mean that you don't get hurt. It doesn't mean that you don't give up things like money or whatever it is. The point is that you survive, and that's, the goal.
Yeah.
You didn't fail.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, I think too, it's like on any of those situations, you're always going to reflect and think about what you could have done better or what you should have done. But you enacted again in the moment, and every time you're in a situation, you just have to look at it as another way of learning something, because your responses and your reactions are just innate at that moment. But that's why, I do think just putting yourself in different scenarios or in a space of a community where you do feel safe, but you are still practicing all the different ways to, whether you use your environment, the tools in your purse or whatever it is, that just, helps to reinforce the story before a similar story happens or could happen. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool. So then you moved on from there, and at some point you were into massage therapy, right?
Yeah, I became a massage therapist young. I went to school for it at 19, so it's been a long time. Yeah, and I've been practicing ever since. So that but that also kind of, I think, riffed off of my martial arts practice too, because I think that well, I tried to get back into martial arts, just not just as an instructor, but also as a student, which didn't take as well as I wanted to, but I really liked the philosophy of it all. And I kind of thought well, if you're going to learn to hurt people, you should also learn to heal people. And I liked, I had a very wrong idea about what massage was and who it was for younger. Similarly about pole dancing, frankly, I can get into that later. But once I enrolled in school, which honestly, I was kind of pressured into doing by my dad, because also by the school, because they just once you enter your phone number, they just kind of hound you to sign up. And my dad was like, you need health insurance, you need to go to school. And I was like, okay, this program is 16 months. It's a 2-year program, but they cram it into 16 months. And I was like, if I hate it, it's not a ton of money. It's fine. But I completely fell in love with learning about the body, and it was just so engrossing to me. So yeah.
Yeah, and there is a different understanding when you actually have your hands on the body as well, of really feeling the muscles and the tightness and and release points. That is just, it's just very unique.
Yeah. For me in my recovery, I maintain that it has been the most profound thing whenever I've gone through a real injury. Granted, you need to find someone who really knows what they're doing. But if you can, I've experienced healing turning points on the massage table that I haven't anywhere else personally. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Do you at certain points worked with races, athletic events?
Yeah, I was I wanted to be specifically a sports massage therapist. So I've worked at triathlons, the marathon. All of that was kind of through my school mostly. They sort of had a sports massage team that they sort of ushered to all of these big events. And then out of school, my first job was out of a personal training studio, and then I started working out of a chiropractor's office. I had my own private practice too, and I currently work out of a gym. So yeah, that's where my private practice lives.
Oh, and is that where you also train too?
That is where I also train. Yeah.
Okay, cool. One of the other things that you had mentioned was your competitive powerlifting days. So you were a very achieved.
Yes.
You are a very achieved powerlifter, setting New York State records for what your weight class, right? In squat, bench, and deadlift.
Yeah. Those are the 3 lifts in powerlifting. So yeah. Yeah. Granted, when I started powerlifting in 2012, and it was way more niche than it is now. It's still pretty niche, but I feel like 2016 powerlifting experience is big boom, because Instagram kind of changed, all of these people started making money filming their workouts and getting sponsorships, which is cool, I don't know, I was never able to do that. I guess I'm just not that good at it. But yeah, yeah, I found powerlifting. I was always really obsessed with being, obsessed, I shouldn't say. I was really, really interested in being strong and like, you know, I mean, I'm a 5 foot tall, you know, woman, and I think,
Who's grown up in Brooklyn?
I grew up on Long Island, and then I moved to
Okay.
Brooklyn in 2006.
Okay.
Yeah, and then, yeah, so I don't know. I feel like I always really wanted to be like take up as much space as I possibly could. Like becoming muscular appealed to me a lot as a kid when it was like not at all cool or like, you know, considered attractive. Not that that really matters to me, but you know, I feel like there's definitely been a big paradigm shift when it comes to athletic or muscular women now versus like the late 90s when I was young, you know. Like I grew up a big professional wrestling fan, and I still am. But like seeing like women who looked like that, I was like, that's fucking cool.
Yeah.
I remember reading an article where the world's strongest woman picks up a car, and I thought that was like the coolest thing you could ever do with your life. Is pick up a car. So I just wanted to be really strong, and I have a friend who introduced me to a powerlifting gym and got me into kind of do a trial session, and then I just sort of did it from there.
And this was also, this is also when you were doing massage therapy.
Yeah, for sure. So that was actually how I got in because the gym was really expensive. This is not the place where I'm training now. The gym was really expensive, and the owner was kind of like, hey, you know, like if you want to come and train here in exchange for working on me, like we can do a little skill trade. And I was like, yes,
let's do that. I love a skill trade.
Yeah. So we did that for a little while, and I don't know, he saw a lot of potential in me and was like, you should really compete. And I was like, no, I'm not interested in competing. I don't want to compete. And he was like, but you're strong. Like, also, it's not a big deal. It's not like there's nothing on the line. It's just a recreational thing. So yeah, I did my first competition and I won, and I was kind of like, I mean, granted, also I competed as a 47 kilo lifter, which is 103 pounds. It's a very small weight class. I will say, at the time of my retirement, though, I retired within the top 10 worldwide.
Wow.
Yeah, so
that's amazing.
It was a really, really fun journey. It lasted about 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So long.
Yeah, so I competed nationally, and then my last meet, which I did not realize was my last meet at the time, was the Arnold Sports Festival in 2020, a week before everything shut down.
Oh,
so it was a weird Arnold because at that point, I was cutting a lot of weight to make that weight class because I just, you know, naturally became more muscular and bigger, but I wanted to remain competitive, so I was doing that. So like, I'm waiting to hear if this meet is even happening because it was on March 8th, and I think March 14th was when everything shut down.
Yeah, around
ish. And this event draws a lot of people from all over the world, you know, it's the Arnold. And so we're like, is this happening? What's going on? I'm like, I'm going to fuck up some Chinese food right now if I don't have to compete. Please tell me. So they decided to have it, but with no spectators. So I was sort of like, oh my God, what a buzzkill. Like, I was so excited to compete in front of all these people.
Changes the energy. The energy is like...
I mean, you know, it was like people who were other athletes who had maybe already completed their event came to watch. So it wasn't like an empty room, but it wasn't what it should have been.
Right.
But yeah, then everything shut down, and, you know, there was just this big sabbatical from my life as I knew it. And so that kind of gave me the opportunity to sort of pivot. But yeah.
And so I think there's some also like going into when did you start pole?
Yeah.
And in that timeline.
Right. Yeah. So I started pole in 2017. So a couple of years before I guess I retired from powerlifting. Tough balance to maintain, you know, like they're such different movement styles. Like one is very repetitive sagittal and transverse movements, and that's it. And you know, if you're not on top of your stretching, you know, definitely very easy to lose your flexibility and just like doing those movements over and over again.
Yeah, because you're also not prioritizing it because it's like that's not the priority. And unless you do need it for your deadlift,
right.
You can't touch your toes.
Yeah.
Like it's a priority to a point.
For sure. And as far as powerlifting goes, it wasn't for me. And then I started pole dancing and I was like, wow, I am like wound like a tight guitar string. Like if I want to be able to do a jade split, I'm gonna have to work on, like addressing the things I've been neglecting. Yeah, I found pole. I don't know. Do you want like the dramatic story of how I found pole?
Sure, sure. I want the real story.
Yeah, sure. So like, basically, well, I had several close friends who were strippers, and they were all going on about like how hard pole dancing was, and I kind of didn't really have a full understanding of what pole dancing was, but me being a strength athlete, I was kind of like, well, if you think it's hard, I want to try it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was just like, anyways, at some point, I did want to strip, and I kind of was like, at some point, I wanted to take a class, just kind of like have something under my belt for an audition, which is absolutely over preparing. I realize that now, but I'm a big over preparer, as mentioned before. It took me 5 years to finally perform. But in any case, I had a partner who very suddenly decided to go to Syria to be an international volunteer in the Rojava conflict. If you don't know what that is, basically it's this Kurdish self-governed area of Syria that is trying to be seized by other militia. And he wanted to go over there and basically be armed watch and defend this area. And he was going to be gone for like a minimum of 6 months. So pretty traumatic. I found this out a week before he left.
Wow.
And, I was kind of like, okay, I sort of don't really know what to do with myself right now. I was kind of trying to connect with my sexuality in a way when I felt really like discarded,
Yeah.
And like at some point, I had an acquaintance who was actually friends with him who started taking pole dance classes like a couple months ago and was just like obsessed with it. And I was like, I need something I can just like become obsessed with and throw myself into. And maybe, something that'll make me feel like good about myself again. So I bought like a 5-class Groupon, totally thinking, again, absolutely underestimating, I should say, pole dance,
Yeah.
I will say right now, pole dancing is the hardest thing I've ever done.
I just said this. I literally just said this on the episode with Sam. I was like, all the modalities, this is the hardest movement I've ever done.
Speaking as somebody who, again, was a very high caliber strength athlete, pole dancing is the hardest shit I've ever done in my life.
Yeah.
We can talk about that more later. Anyways, I show up to class with Stella, my Bella, and I walked out of that class. I had never felt better about myself in my life. And I've never had an area where I could even experiment with hyperfemininity. Like I was this rough and tough, like, like bench press champ, like riding motorcycles, wearing like boots and leather jacket. Like I absolutely did not feel safe feeling like I could look super feminine
and still be a strong woman.
Yeah, no, totally.
Right?
Like, or even like at all, I mean, I feel like you go to the pole studio and I felt like I was at the slumber party I never got invited to as a kid, I'm like looking around and it's all these like girls and like, gay guys in like pajamas and underwear. And I'm just like, oh my God, I've never been in like, a place where I've never even put on high heels before pole.
Right.
So like, it just I kind of joke, I say that pole sort of felt like drag to me for a long time. And that's not really true anymore. I think it's really kind of become who I am. But in the beginning, I felt like this sort of like awkward tomboy, like trying to skate around in 8-inch heels and feel, like
I still feel that way.
Yeah.
Coming into my basketball and everything.
But
it's not, I mean, it's very inviting community. That's the best part is like, everyone's like so inviting and welcoming.
Yeah. So. Yeah. But yeah, I became obsessed with it instantly. And I knew I was like, this 5-class pole, like this pole package is going to dry up real fast. I totally thought I was going to walk in, like take 5 classes, rock it, have a party trick and like be done with it. You telling me I'd be here 7+ years later, she'd be like, no, we, no. But yeah, I mean, then the studio I went to kind of had this like act fast, like you can get 5 more classes for a really discounted rate, but you got to buy it like within 24 hours. I was like, I guess I'm buying it, because I want to go back tomorrow and I'm like, I want to go back the next day.
Yeah. Also, Stella's a great person to have as a first.
Totally. Yeah. She's incredible.
Yeah. Well, I think we're gonna have an episode with her.
Yes,
as well.
you absolutely should.
Yeah.
I still take class with her today.
Yeah.
You know, like and it's such a privilege to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not OG, but I'm also like I've been around like a good chunk of time, and a lot of my teachers have moved on. But no, Sam is another one of my older teachers. Not early days because she wasn't teaching a lot of beginner stuff, but like by the time I got to like level 3, 4, I was taking class with her a lot. But yeah, I just like, and it totally like shifted my sense of self. You know, like I wound up leaving that relationship. Like I feel, and I really do feel like Paul gave me that kind of confidence to do that. And I wasn't a person who struggled with confidence. You know, I mean, like I very much built myself into the person I wanted to be, but I felt like there's this big potential for facet of myself that I felt totally unsafe to tap into.
Right.
And Paul gave me that, you know? So yeah, I was just so hooked on it. And it also gave me a creative expression for movement that like powerlifting just didn't, you know, like powerlifting's not really about creativity. It's about showing up and repetition. And I think that's totally valuable. And I absolutely use that in my pole, you know, practice. But yeah, it was just like, I was like, oh my God, I can interact with music and I love music and I can think about like, yeah, I can just be a little bit more creative and open my body up instead of just like tensing everything all the time, which is what I really needed, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely something to just be like open to the world instead of just like, I have you at the the grip of my hands. No, I'm opening myself. Yeah. It's and the somatic releases in pole are very different than any other movement practice. Because, you know, we oftentimes during the day we do restrict like our spine because like we're like, oh, that looks weird when if you just walk down the street with a ooey gooey spine or those kind of things. It's just I think that there's a lot of movement that we restrict, unfortunately, throughout the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think pole just kind of allows you to, and it allows you an apparatus to balance with and get a lot of those undulations and spinal like gooiness that you might just like be kind of like restricting yourself
absolutely from. It's like it's an anchor and you can use it as such. I mean, you know, I move much better in heels grabbing onto a pole than I do walking down the street, I'll tell you that. I feel like, you know, it frees you up to kind of be like, okay, here's my anchor point, what can I do with the rest of my body? I also think that it's interesting too because in movement practices like power, like I did a lot of I've done a lot of strength training as well, or moving with athletic equipment. But it's interesting to have one object and you're moving around it as opposed to you moving an object. So it's like you're working on different like contact points and you're working on force in a different way because your force is coming from something vertical as opposed to like just the ground. So it gives you this relationships with physics that like you didn't really even realize was possible. Absolutely. Yeah.
And this whole awareness, I even take it into basketball to where now sometimes I'm like throwing passes that like I'm like I see them coming, I'm like doing some type of weird spin move and then throwing it. Like one time I jumped up in the air, threw a pass behind my head while spinning. This was like last year in like a competitive game and I was like, this is the best pass I've thrown in my life. Like and I was like, that's I think in credit to pole because it's like the awareness in space is wild.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you having to like just pay attention to so many things while you are spinning and like moving through this vertical plane and apparatus and connection to a force as opposed to just the ground, which is also a wonderful movement piece, the ground.
Absolutely. But I'm like, I always tell my intro students at the end of class, like, especially if I feel like I have a class that feels particularly frustrated, I'm like, nothing really that we do translates to the pole in the same way, which maybe is like not exactly what you're saying, but you know, like moving in these circular patterns, going from like forward to backward. I think you can then take it after you've learned it, you know, and adapt it to your life after the fact. But when people come in for the first time, they're super confused by, you know, moving in these sort of spiralic patterns. I'm like, yeah, of course. It's like completely turning your brain upside down. I mean, how many...
Without going upside down at first.
Right. Not this, but even like as you continue to go on, I mean, there's so much. Pole requires you to rewire your brain, continue at like various checkpoints in your journey. I mean, in nothing else that I can think of other than, you know, other aerial arts, are you hanging upside down from your knee pit? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's just, and then you're having to tell your brain that it's safe.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're like, why the fuck does this hurt so much? I'm like, well, it's because your brain thinks it's dangerous. You've never done it. And frankly, you know, it's not really what it's made for, but you can. Yeah. And you have to, you know, you're not killing your nerves. You're telling your brain that you're safe. Right. But your brain is not aware of that yet. And it's sending you signals telling you that you're not, which is why like pole's so frustrating for a lot of people because there's such a steep, not just learning curve, but a courage curve, you know, yeah.
And when you experience fear, like they've looked at the brain in various ways, and like when you're experiencing a lot of gratitude, your brain is like lit up in all the ways. When you're experiencing fear and like you're going down a cycle of fear, your cerebellum also shuts off. Yeah. So it's like, if you're so fearful, you stop problem solving, like you're not looking for a way out. It's also like leveling out the right amount of fear for you as a student or as an instructor to tailor to students, which can also be very challenging. I've been in so many classes, and I've also like had such a great appreciation for the instructors because everyone's coming in with different bodies, and even if it's a level 2, some people are more flexible, some people are more like they're stronger, some people are just like they are coming from a dance background or like a martial arts background or no background at all. So the ability to cater to everyone and try to make everyone feel successful or progressing in the class is also something that's a huge art of instructing.
Absolutely. I mean, I can definitely, you know, say, yes, I came into the pole studio with all of this strength, right? And I thought that was going to be enough because everyone's just like, oh, it's hard. And I'm like, I equate, you know, difficulty with, you know, strength force, you know, right. Exactly. But then I learned, I was like, oh my God, it's not just strength. Also, strength is very positional. While I did come in with all of this strength, and yes, it did help me to be able to do certain things very quickly. This like push pull is with, you know, one arm pushing, one arm pulling was very foreign to me. And that like, humbled me very fast because I thought I would just be able to like do an Iron X. And I was like, no, you can't actually, it's really fucking hard.
It's true. It's like that push pull is very different. It's not something that you usually get in a weighted experience.
Right. But that's to say too, it's like pole, what I love about pole is that there's so many different avenues you can take with it. Most of my favorite pole dancers never leave the floor. Right. Like, honestly, and you know, like you might not think that, you know, like I did kind of look to what my strengths were, but I'm not interested in circus style pole personally. You know what I mean? Like the whole point was for me to have, like a sexual, erotic, outlet, you know, and I'm like, I'm not trying to just do, you know, strength move. I can do those things and I want them to look kind of gooey and, you know, and dance them. And then I like doing like dynamic explosive stuff because I think that shit is just so badass. And like, you know, I love the opportunity to conquer fears and pole. Some of my favorite parts of it. Yeah. But that being said, I mean, most of my favorite movers are like, you know, quote unquote, I guess base work sort of movers. And but there are so many different ways you can take it. Yeah, there's students who've been doing this for like less than a year, but they have this dance background and they can do these beautiful like extended allegras and whatnot. I will never do that. You know, I mean, I will continue to try to make it better, but I know that my body is not going to reach those end ranges at this point, and that's okay with me. Yeah. So you kind of find where you can excel and also where you enjoy. you know, the goal doesn't have to be excelling either. And I think that that's something a lot of people need to learn a little bit, which, you know, I think getting better and wanting to get better is very noble and enjoyable. But you know, if you're really drawn to, say, beautiful shapes on spin pole, but you're not super flexible, that doesn't mean that like you don't do that.
Right.
It means that you continue to do the thing that you enjoy and just try to continue to get better at it and enjoy the process of getting better. Otherwise, it isn't enjoyable, right?
Yeah, I think too. Even like there's times where like I've been in classes where we're doing a super back bendy shape, and I'm like, I'm just gonna hang here and breathe. And I'll tell the instructor, I'm like, I'm just gonna breathe here and just see if I can get a little farther. And you don't. The thing is, that's another thing with boundaries and limitations. If you don't reach your limitations and try to sit with them or try to push them a little bit, you'll never know where they are, and your limitations and restrictions get smaller. So it's like hanging out in them and just breathing them, seeing which ways your body can maybe compensate in a different way, or you're not activating something,
right?
Is again, to your point, a beautiful learning and like nuance area for you to be experiencing in that moment. I also think I want to go back to the correlation between powerlifting and pole, because I think that it's just very interesting because you're just so experienced in both. But the like in powerlifting, you're like kind of like told or encouraged to make like these like grunts and these like and then in pole it's kind of like you're trying to make something look as like elegant as possible, or just like be in this strong Aisha hold and like wiggle your legs like they're just weightless. It's a totally different performance.
I would say it can be, but I'd also challenge that idea, because I mean, yes, I think obviously you think of pole dance, you think, yes, very like elegant sort of movement.
Right.
But I don't think it has to be that. I actually love the potential that pole has to be super creepy. Like, and around Halloween time, you'll see a lot of people posting videos of, doing like, these sort of like possessed sort of movements. And I'm like, that is so interesting to me.
That's true. Very
true. No, it's true though. And I think it's like, if you're, yes, if you're not afraid to kind of be expressive in that way, in a way that's like quote unquote ugly, I mean, a lot of people like point your toes, like point your toes. And I'm like, actually though, like if you can very intentionally flex your feet, you can even just, I mean, so many times I'll watch certain routines where someone be in the shape and then nothing moves except they have a very sharp point and then flex. And it's really interesting to watch.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So it's sort of flipping that on its head, because, also you want to be a little different, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I know when I would come up to the barbell I had this like kind of almost like a war dance. Like I had all these like ways that I would approach the bar, and everybody had this of their own. And it was also really cool to watch like everyone's little setup and how they would, some people would be really calm. Some people would like stomp their feet. I had a very like specific way that I would approach the bar for all three lifts. But I always did them. And because I always did them, if I didn't do that, I would not feel confident that the weight was going to go up unless I did that. It's not a superstition thing; it's a repetition thing.
Yeah, it's your getting in that mindset. Same thing for basketball. If you watch a basketball player, they're shooting a foul shot. The ref passes them the ball. They have the same routine every time, whether it's one dribble, two dribbles.
Right.
When I was very young, I used to have this like rhythm, but then my mom told me, she's like, that's too many dribbles. If you mess up, you're going to be like, you're going to be thrown off. She's like, you should simplify it. So then I simplified it. But I still remember to this day the pattern that I would have like before just shooting a free throw. And again, it all of like, I think movement and repetitions, it can get you into a certain mindset or a certain zone.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you're looking to get into. Which is cool.
Yeah.
Also, I just love the fact that I think that the lifting that you do,
Mm-hmm.
and anyone with a lifting background has experienced this, like, this doing hard things,
Mm-hmm.
the trying hard things and doing hard things, which I think is like is needed if you want to achieve certain things in pole, because there are some things that are very hard and take months to achieve, years to achieve. Years. So yeah. So that just that the mindset again of doing hard things is really like a really cool crossover.
Absolutely. And you know, if there's one thing that really I took away from powerlifting that translated to pole, was showing up is the hardest part. And I know we hear it all the time, but it is true. Showing up is the hardest part. And you have to know, well, for me, I took this from powerlifting because it wound up being a direct correlation. Not everyone is this way. You have to know how you're best productive. For me, I know that I'm most productive when I have a plan. I'm not a freestyler.
Right.
You know, and I think that one is kind of treated like it's better than the other. I disagree. If I gave into the peer pressure that I need to be showing up to the studio, like able to just flow and freestyle, I would not really do very much. I kind of feel like I forget how to dance when it's time to freestyle. And I'd love to get better at that. But frankly, I also just know that I'm a little bit too scatterbrained for that. And I'm better when I have a plan, and I get a lot of gratification out of like ticking off the boxes, even if I didn't achieve the shape. The fact that I knew that I trained it, and being able to be like, I worked on this today is beneficial to me. So
and there's ways to freestyle in shapes too. Like once you feel comfortable enough in a shape, I feel like there's a lot of freestyle that can happen there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But But I also know that I'm like, for me, I'll be like, oh my God, what do I do here now? And like, you know, then it starts to be like, that next shape I'm thinking of, have I trained it spinning in this direction? Do I feel safe in it? Which then goes back to the point of like, well, if I did train it a bunch, you know, spinning in that direction, I would know that I feel safe in it. But in the moment, I often, you know, doubt. And it just doesn't feel like it's this big, you know, opportunity for growth and expression. It actually just feels kind of like scary. Like, you know, and scary is a good growth for that. But for me, I know that I like to kind of feel like, okay, I usually come up with combos in the middle of the night. I have like this shitty kind of insomnia where, well, I guess they're all shitty, but I fall asleep no problem, but I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm up for hours. That's usually like I wake up and I start thinking about pole dancing and I get all these combos in my head. I'm like, okay, I want to like try that now. And you know, just approaching the studio with that idea and that plan is a good way for me to train personally.
So it sounds like you also like shut your brain off at night from the critical side, and then that's where your creative side comes in, and you're like, oh, this is the stuff I can actually train.
I think that's sometimes true, but I definitely have those like, you know, those like half asleep dreams you have where you're falling. And you like jolt awake. I have those about pole a lot.
Yes. I mean, that's true. I went to a retreat a couple of years ago for the first time, and it was based off of a lot of like natural parkour. And the first night, because the first day we started running down a creek, jumping from slippery rock to mossy slippery rock, and over big rocks, and then we were jumping off cliffs, and I've never gone cliff jumping. Like, so then at night I was like jumping the whole night because I was like, oh my gosh, experiencing all these situations again. The brain processes things in a very interesting way.
Absolutely. And it is often overnight. Like, and I'll tell students this a lot too. I'm like, if you're not getting it in the classroom, I don't want you to beat yourself up over it. Your brain, when you go to sleep tonight, your brain is going to continue to process it. And if you come back tomorrow or in a couple of days, even if you don't get it, I think you're going to have an aha moment, but you have to just let it like percolate in your brain a little bit, you know?
Yes. There's no magic pill for this, for sure. There's, it's not going to happen. So, something else that you brought up too is, your interest in drops. Like dynamic drops. I know you've done a workshop on it. I think that's something that's also really cool. So can you explain a little bit about drops and why you like them?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first time I really saw, when I first started pole dancing, one of my older teachers, Tahira Nesfield, who, as far as I know, doesn't really dance too much anymore, or doesn't perform or teach anymore, at least currently. But she did this routine to Janet Jackson's Black Cat, and it was the first time I saw a tumble, and I had that like I thought, thought she was gonna die, and but she was just like so in control, and I was like, I can't. How powerful must it be to just trust yourself that much? Because it was like, I mean, yeah, it was just shocking to watch, and like, it just arrests the whole audience because you're like, oh my god, like, what's happening? You know what I mean?
Calmly,
yeah. I mean, like, when I dance at the bar, I do a ball drop, and a lot of people think it's not intentional, and they're like, oh my god, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I meant to do that. That look fine, right? But but that's also the big moneymaker moment, right? Because you scare the shit out of everybody, and they're like, oh my god, forget it, But yeah, I mean, so for me, again, I'm much more flexible now than I used to be. But I think for me, like, I wasn't going to feel super badass hitting these like split shapes because I just knew that they weren't going to look the way that I wanted them to. I was like, I'm not going to hit, these extended, beautiful shapes, but I might scare the shit out of you. And I think that is kind of like where in my performing power kind of lies. So I'm actually a huge fraidy cat on the pole. I'm going to say that right now. I'm super fucking scared on the pole almost all the time, even still to this day. But I'm a big fan of training wheels. And if I have like a flip that I want to get, I will show up to the studio. I'm like, for the hour, I'm just going to prepare to try to do this. I can't tell you, I do this brass monkey flip a lot in my pieces. And you're in a brass monkey, you're kind of like in a little flatline sort of position, and then you send your unhooked leg over, you release your first hand, and then you land on your feet. And I've done that in 8-inch heels. But I can't tell you how many times I showed up to the studio, I got in that brass monkey, looked down at the floor, and I'd be like, nope, and got down, and like would continue to get up the pole, get in the brass, look down, chicken out, but that's part of the process. You have to kind of like get to a point where you're like, okay, I've climbed to this pole now 30 times, and I've looked at my landing spot, and at some point I just have to trust myself and go for it. Like I'm getting annoyed, like you have to kind of get annoyed at yourself for like being, for not having that trust in yourself. So I think that's one of the things I really love about pole, is that it gives me the opportunity to conquer fears all the time in really like profound ways, and ways that I can use, then I can get over that, and then I can put it on stage, and it's going to look really badass. And I love that,
Yeah, I think, one of my first flips was actually in your class.
Yeah.
It was like
butterfly flip,
the Jasmine one.
Butterfly flip.
Butterfly. And I think like for whatever it was that day, I was just like, this is like, I'm in the mindset to do this. And it really does take a big, it goes back to that mindset shift. There's like, they even did like studies on, baseball players and like throwing pitches, and when people when they imagine that the ball, like if it's thrown at different, they've done numerous experiments with this, but at some point players who were hitting the ball were able to say that they imagined the ball getting bigger as it approached the plate, or if they imagine it getting bigger, they're more likely to hit it. If they imagined it getting smaller, it was like less likely. So it's a big, like, going back to your environment. So what you were saying at the beginning, like knowing what to do in your environment, knowing that you're safe, knowing that you trust yourself and you trust the environment to hold you, is like, it's a lot. It's a lot of actually getting the thing.
Totally. And obviously all of these things are technical, flips, drops, etc. No exception. But I do think those things are more mental than anything. And I like that sort of, I guess, liberation from, and I'm a huge technique nerd, but like, when it comes to doing that stuff, I'm like, it's really just me and my brain right now trying to do this move. It's not because I don't have this end range of motion locked down. It's not because of whatever. It's just because I'm here and I'm trying to get down on the floor in this dynamic and kind of scary way, and I just have to convince myself that I can do it, and I have the tools, and I trust myself, and I just think that those are really powerful moments. Those like breakthrough moments in the studio or wherever you practice, you know.
Yeah, a trick I also started to use was when I went to the retreat again. I had like again, I never cliff jumped, and the second time I went up, I was like, you know what? I'm in this beautiful place. I'm surrounded in this amazing scenery. I'm about to jump with this beautiful view, and that's how I like approached everyone, as opposed to just like psyching myself out. I was like, you know, like this is just so serene and so beautiful, and it's an amazing moment to be a part of. So sometimes I'll try to bring myself back to that, and just like even just appreciate like, oh, I did a little baby one, right? I can do this, you know. So changing the way that like it just being in a moment of appreciation rather than criticism, especially at a moment of a drop. Like, there's times to be critical and technical about things, but I think also drops are more of like you really got to trust that you're going to land on your feet. Like that's more of a time to be like, I got this.
Totally.
And then maybe look at your video and clean it up after, or listen to the instructor and clean it up.
And I'd say, you know, land on the balls of your feet. That's the biggest technical, you know, even in heels, like think about landing on the balls of your feet. That's going to be the most sound technical advice I can give for most of these things where you land on your feet.
That would be terrible. The heels, the heels are very tiny. Very tiny surface area.
I mean, like you could land on the stiletto itself. Like, you know, I mean, if you land on the stiletto, unless you're actively flexing your feet, you're also landing on the platform. So there's that. But I mean, like when I land in heels, I'm still just thinking about landing on the platform, not on also the stiletto. But you could, you know. But I just know that for me, when I land on my feet, I'm always like landing on the balls of my feet. So I'm going to keep that same orientation for my feet, regardless if I'm barefoot or not.
Awesome. So I'm going to go back to instructing. One of your followers had asked, what is the hardest part about being an instructor?
Not giving into the pressure to like keep things so new and interesting so that people keep coming back. Also, I'm profoundly hard of hearing, and that's my own personal struggle teaching. So I have to kind of like dart around the room when people have questions. But that's me personally. That may not apply to the person asking this. I mean, I think like at the end of the day, pole is, I've never done a discipline where people were so eager is I guess the nice way to put it, for like new shit all the time and so unsatisfied so fast, you know.
So it's like once you get the goal, it's like, okay, now I gotta move on.
Or even if they don't get the goal, like I mean, I would love to call in for a little bit and ask, why do people think that pole should be so easily attainable? And I mean, I think that there's a lot of things to be said about that, you know. Like again, I came into pole thinking that it was going to be this party trick that I was going to master in 5 classes, and obviously it's not the fucking case. But like, you know, why do you think that you should be able to do these things that your instructors or people that you're watching online or whatever have been training for years and years the first time that you try it? Why are you letting yourself become so frustrated? Why, after you do it once, do you want something new? You know, I mean, the first time you do something, it probably doesn't quite look the way that you want it to. So as an instructor, I think for me, I'm really committed to not screwing up my students' pole journey by like, you know, just throwing a bunch of stuff at them. But I also know that like, yes, there are different strengths and weaknesses in class because pole is for everybody. And I want to make sure also that I have enough where people feel accomplished. You know, it sucks when you leave class being like, I couldn't do anything. Even though that's like, that's the journey to learning to do stuff. You can't do it at first. You tried it. And then maybe you kind of figured out why it didn't work. And then eventually figure out why it does. But yeah, as an instructor, it's definitely sticking to my guns and being like, no, you're not going to do that thing yet because you need the foundational thing first. And I know that you want that thing, and maybe you're going to feel pressure to ask another instructor for that thing. But, you know, if you don't feel solid in the thing that gets you there, then you're just like kind of muscling yourself through moves. And I did that, you know, and I mean, I was an absolute trick chaser in my, like, you know, first couple of years. And then I think 5 years in, I was looking at all my stuff and I was like, yeah, okay, I can get into this, that, and the other thing. But my journey there doesn't look good. And now I have to go back. And like, honestly, a lot of my training right now is like training inverts on spin, like super basic, like, you know, I mean, I don't want to say super basic, but like for someone who's been doing it 7 years, like just really going back and training my transitions and feeling solid in that stuff. And I think that when you pole dance for a long time, your practice does kind of migrate there, where you're like mostly conditioning, chasing tricks. It's fine, but you become more invested in your movement quality after you've gotten a bunch of stuff. You want to make it look better after a little while. Like trick chasing doesn't feel as gratifying because maybe you don't like the way it looks, and that becomes more important to you, you know?
Yeah. And I think that with most of it, the transitions is what's the interesting part anyways. Because like, yeah, you can see something like, oh, that's cool. But when you get like surprised by a transition, you're like, oh, I didn't know.
When you're moving, you know, like the shapes are static-ish. It depends. But they're more static. The transitions are when you're actively moving. You know, that can be the more interesting stuff especially for the trained eye, I think, you know?
Yeah.
For the more experienced eye, in terms of watching pole dance, I should say. Yeah. Like when I see a really like little transition that has an accent that I've never seen before, I'm like, ooh, I want to try that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's why I like performances too. Like, oh, I didn't even think that could happen. Yeah. But I did want to go back to the fact that when you were talking about training, you spoke about, I remember you saying this once, that you like to train in silence.
Yes.
And I really appreciated that because I was like, wow, like so many people get impacted by their movement choices. You did say that music, there, like you were drawn to pole because there was musicality, but also there is this really cool ability to train in silence and be motivated in silence without like something else like motivating you as well. And I think that a lot of the times when you are in silence, it allows you to pay attention to the things that sometimes you're just distracting yourself from through music or something else.
Absolutely.
And like when you're in silence, that's why people go on silence retreats, right? Like they like really like are focused in whatever, engrossed in whatever they're doing.
I mean, I'm a big music lover, don't get me wrong. But I also, when I was powerlifting, I mostly trained in silence. My first powerlifting gym forbade, like did not play music and did not let you put in headphones. So I guess I did that as sort of the baseline that I was used to. But my life is very loud. You know, I dance at a heavy metal bar. And I think I appreciate the opportunity to kind of just listen to myself. Going back to the question about like how long it takes me to come up with a performance, you know, I have these ideas in my head, right, about where things will go in a certain song. And then I go and try them. And sometimes I feel like I'm maybe being bullied by the music, you know, like I'm like, no, I have to hit this on this. And you know, I want to do those things, but the process of coming up with the piece does involve a lot of extraction because I have to not let the music bully me, carry me away, get me to a point where I'm just like exhausted before the piece is even over. It's okay if you're exhausted when it's done. I usually am, but you know, I have to think about sustainability so that I feel safe performing. And so to your point, when I'm training, you know, songs can absolutely help. You know, they can prompt me to move. But if I'm simply trying to work on a skill, I don't feel the need to train with music, you know. I like to just kind of be able to observe myself. I'm a very visual learner, and I just want all of my attention focused on what I'm looking at. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. And you said you did state at one point that you were like hard of hearing in moments too. And like, I also am curious to know, like, especially as an instructor or like performer, does it do you feel like it can be very exhausting sometimes when you're just like in an environment, you know, or in the nightlife or just like any of those environments and like I imagine because I do have a friend who is hard of hearing and she's like it's just so exhausting throughout the day because she can't hear in one of her ears, so she's like I'm constantly trying to figure out where things are coming from and
it's absolutely an exhausting disability to have. You know, I think just you spend so much energy, you know, just having conversations with people. Like I really have to kind of strain and read lips, and in the classroom, just the acoustics are not ideal. And I have to, if somebody has a question, I used to be better about, you know, making everyone aware, but I used to be like, raise your hand, let me come over to you. If you ask it where you are, I will not know what you're saying. So I yeah, it's definitely exhausting. For sure. I don't know. But there are, we all get dealt a certain hand. I don't pity myself for it. In nightlife, I mean, yeah, like again, I work in a really, really loud bar and you know, the next day I'll just be like, I mean, I wear earplugs when I dance. Now, just to kind of protect my hearing a little bit, because we also have like shows in the back too. So it's a very, not only is there a live band playing, but then we have the bartender playing the aux trying to drown out the loud live band with like, you know, her playlist. So it's just a lot. You know, yeah, the bar is not where I'm gonna expend myself too hard to converse unless it's worth it. You know, I'm smiling and nodding is usually what they want.
Yeah.
I hope they're not listening to this. Yeah, but
they want the drops.
Yeah. But yeah, that's just yeah, but you know, what are you gonna do? You know?
Yeah. Well, it's like it's just good to know these things too, and just be aware of them as a student or as like
because it's invisible, you know, too. Yeah, I was diagnosed with hearing loss as a teenager, and you know, it was tough because most people don't expect like a 13-year-old is going to have like some kind of a hearing disability. So a lot of times I was treated like I was stupid or rude because like someone might call my name and I wouldn't answer them. Or I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you, and I like, you know, just in my day-to-day, I don't do this with my students, but if somebody's just kind of small talking with me, I might like just smile and go, yeah, because I like didn't really understand what they said, and sometimes it's not appropriate for what they said to me, but I'm just like tired, you know. And I will say, like, if you ever do interact with a hard of hearing person and they ask you to repeat yourself, please never say never mind. It is so rude. And I know that like you think that it's not that important, but like if I'm asking you to repeat yourself, it's because I wanted to know what you said. Please don't like block me from my involvement in the conversation, you know?
Yeah, I can imagine that would be.
Yeah. It's like the number one faux pas, like just say it again, say it louder, you know, like face me.
Yeah.
Those are the big things. Like wait for me to be close enough to you. Those are the big things that I need from people who are talking to me, you know?
Yeah, and if you think about it too in like everyday life, nowadays it's like it's not as, I mean, there's a lot of conversations you have with people and they're not looking at you in the eyes. Like they're just like turned away, like mumbling. Yeah. And I'm just like, I'm imagining that would be just hard.
Oh no, I can't. Yeah. Like if I'm walking with somebody out on the street and they're a step ahead of me, I won't know what they're saying. Being at a dinner table, if I'm like at a big family gathering, I just can't partake, you know, like I'll talk to the person next to me, but that's kind of the most I can do. And it's okay, you know, like I just hope that people understand that like if I'm not being super engaged in the conversation, it's not because I don't like you. It's just difficult, you know?
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
There's a lot of personal things as well. So few last things to wrap it up, because we have been talking for a little bit, which is wonderful. It's been a great conversation. So is there any like good books you're reading at the moment, or anything like you're interested in learning at the moment?
When it comes to movement or
What? Anything.
Okay.
Like just anything for the listeners.
Man. All right. I mean, I read like strictly nonfiction.
Cool.
I used to be a much bigger reader. I gotta be honest with you, the pandemic totally obliterated my ability to finish books. I have started many books. Honestly, I'm I'm really big in occult studies, and I'm mostly reading stuff about occult studies right now.
I do love a cult documentary. I haven't read any cult books though.
Yeah. I'm reading a lot about like certain about like Satanism and goddesses and whatnot. I'm kind of still coming off of the Halloween tip, but I guess that's sort of my life all the time. Yeah, that's sort of just what I'm studying a lot. Like I'm a tarot reader, and I've been reading a lot about different ways to approach the tarot. I don't know. As winter comes, I really like the invitation to just retire to my chambers come nightfall and like work on my own practice. And like that's sort of what I have the energy for. So that's sort of what I'm mostly reading about right now.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. What is it that you enjoy seeing in your classes or students or anything?
Well, I get a lot of gratification out of, although it kind of pisses me off because it'll be something that takes me so long to do. So you're a student of mine, you know that I'm super anal about technique, and I'll be like, before we even get on the pole, I'm going to be like, here are the things that are going to make it work. Here are the things that are going to make it fail. So that you get to attempt it knowing all of that, which might be a little bit of information overload for some people, but I would rather you have productive repetitions before, your body just shouldn't do it anymore for that day. So I try to present all of these things. That being said, a lot of my students get moves the first time they try it because I gave them all of my trial and error findings to go attempt it for the first time with. And I'll be like, man, screw you guys. It took me months to do that. And that's not a crap on my instructors or anything like that. I just think that for me, I'm such a high maintenance pole student. And frankly, I learned from a lot of the best. And a lot of them just, maybe didn't have this. I don't want to say definitively. I don't know about people's journeys getting into certain things, but I think it's people who are just naturally good at stuff, certain things, may not understand why it's hard for me. And so I had to kind of be like, why is this not working for me? And really become investigative about my movement. So I had a lot of mental notes about why things didn't work, and eventually why they did. And so now I bring that in my classes, and obviously it's so nice for me to see that those things are translatable to so many other people, and that all of those hours that I've struggled trying to get Aisha or whatever, paid off in the end, because now I get paid to relay all that information. So those are things I love to see.
I think that going to a lot of different classes, I take different information from different instructors, and I'm like, oh, this, and then also from my own practice too, I'm like, this feels better spinning this way, and this, but again, it's taking from the different points, and I do feel like you've been a student, and a very active student, and also active in the practicing part, that you've been able to take so many notes that yes, you present a lot of them on the table. So that is probably why some people get it right away, but it's also helpful, especially as when you have intermediate students, because I feel like they're able to decide, even though you might seem like it's information overload, they're able to decide what information is relevant to them. So if they feel like they don't sit in their knee pit from their outside leg hanging like they should, but you're saying this is a super important contact point as you transition to this, they're paying attention to what pieces you're saying that's relevant to their practice.
Totally.
Which I very much enjoy. And then the trying it and then going back through it. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
So thank you for
of course.
doing all
Like,
that.
the success of pole moves is so nuanced. Like, you know, and it's the things that people kind of take for granted, you know, if you're trying to be in your sit to your little like sneaky V thing to your inside leg hang, right? Like, where is your bottom arm? Is it low enough? And a lot of people are like, no, I like, you know, I want to kind of like keep it higher to be able to hold myself up. I'm like, no, you know, just the little things that people take for granted are the things that make it stable, and you have to treat all those things like they're their own shapes, you know. Like when I teach outside leg hang, I steal something from Laura Michaels, who's one of my older teachers who I still DM with a lot whenever I can't get something.
Yeah, she's still a teacher.
Yeah, she's teaching at a Full Circle Harlem. Maybe somewhere else, but as of right now, I know her to be teaching there. But yeah, she taught outside leg hang to be like, you have to put both of your legs up towards the ceiling. She called it the diagonal of success, and I use that also because it's true. And you have to treat that little like interstitial move as its own shape, because it is. All of these things are shapes, you know. But if you don't give it the time to solidly get there, then most likely your end result might feel a little sketchy or just not look the way that you want it to. You know?
Yeah. Well, there's so much technicality and detail in your classes. So if you haven't taken class with Leah, definitely make that a priority. You teach beginners,
I teach intro. So I teach intro every Friday at 10 at Incredible, and I teach intermediate every Sunday at 5 at Incredible. So those are my two static classes, but I cover a lot too, so it kind of depends. And I always post whenever I'm teaching, so if you ever want to know what I'm teaching, I always put up a story about it. But yeah, and I love teaching what you want to learn too. Like, I like to kind of pull ideas from my students, because, you know, I want to help you with what you want to learn, you know, as long as it feels that it's level appropriate. So
right. Or you give the training wheels if it's not level appropriate, which is good to know where something's going.
big on training wheels. Like I said, like when I learned flips and stuff like that, like that if there's a training wheel version of it, you bet I've done it a ton, you know, because I needed to convince my brain that it's safe to do, you know, without the training wheels. So
okay, and then so besides Incredible, or where else can people contact you? Maybe your Instagram handle.
My Instagram handle is my name with an X at the end. That's LeahRayeix. You do have to type in the whole thing because I'm shadow banned to hell. And that's the best way probably to reach out to me.
Okay. Yeah, and so I'll include all of the links to Leah's things in the bio. So if you are interested in reaching out, you can do so through there. You can also find her at Incredible.
You can take my class. You can book a private with me. You know, let me know what you want to work on, and
and so what is one message you have for all the listeners if you were to talk about movement or life or anything, something you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. I feel like I more or less said this, but like, please have respect for the process. You know, I mean, even my intro students, when I teach them dip turns, they'll be like, but mine doesn't look like yours. I'm like, yeah, obviously it doesn't, you know, like, don't have respect for the process. Anything worth doing is worth putting all the hours into. If you're feeling like you're an imposter, I want you to reconsider that anyone who ever experiences imposter syndrome is because they care about it a whole lot. There are so many people in the world who do things and they just do them unqualified because they think that craft isn't actually that demanding or that important or that skilled. And those people never experience imposter syndrome because they simply don't care. If you feel like you're not a dancer, even though you show up and you dance regularly, it's because you actively respect dance. And because you respect it so much, you cannot be an imposter. So
that's beautiful. I love that. Like, you can be whatever you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. If you care, you are not an imposter. You know, sure. strive for growth, but you are what you show up to be on a regular basis, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you,
Of
Leah.
course.
Yeah, hope to have more conversations with you soon.
Yeah,
possibly.
absolutely. Thank you
And
so much for having me on, Teresa.
yes, if you have any questions, feel free to message us through the podcast or through the Instagram.
Mhm.
We love hearing your questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.